Okay, the big hand is on the 12th, so we'll call to order this March 16th, 2023 planning meeting of the Whitefish Planning Board. Can we get a roll call, please, Kenny?
Good evening. Whitney Beckham?
Here.
Scott Friedenberger?
Here.
John Middleton is absent. Chris Gardner? Here. Ellison Linville? Here. Steve Quinnell?
Here.
Toby Scott?
Here.
Okay, thank you, Kenny. The first order on the agenda is agenda changes. Anybody want to move anything around tonight? Is there any suggestion from staff on any of that? Okay. And approval of minutes from the February 16th meeting is the next item. Can I get a motion, please?
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
Okay, moved and seconded. Any discussion on that or changes to the minutes? Okay, those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. Okay, and with one abstention. So it passes 5-0 with one abstention of Toby Scott. The next item on the agenda is communications from the public for items not on the agenda. We have 4 public hearings tonight. If you'd like to speak to one of those, to any one of those, I would ask that you wait until those public hearings are called. Does anybody wish to speak on any items not on the agenda tonight? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to unfinished business, of which we have none, which brings us to our first public hearing, WZC 23-01, a request by the City of Whitefish for a zoning map amendment to change a parcel recently annexed into the city from R3 to R1. And this is Nelson.
Hi. Yep. So the reason that we're annexed, so the applicants of the city, we're looking to rezone this recently annexed parcel from the county's R3, which is a single-family residential district, to like zoning of our WR1 single-family residential district. And again, the parcel is 625 Lund Lane, and it's approximately 9.9 acres. And so the existing land use, it's currently vacant and has been recently, again, annexed. And so that's why we need to get it rezoned, because it currently, when it goes from county to the city zoning, we need to change the zone. The parcel has been identified as rural residential on the Whitefish future land use map. The adjacent parcels are all residential R3 zoned out in the county as well. There's currently water services, and any sewer would have to be extended and paid for by the property owner. A public notice was sent out in the paper and mailed to landowners, and I have received no public comment at the writing of the report or after. So the findings of fact has to be made in accordance with the growth policy, and although the growth policy designation is rural residential, that would be consistent with WCR or WA10. But the city has a policy of to not downzone properties if they're annexed from the county, and we will rezone to the closest equivalent. And additionally, a state law requires that zoning upon annexation to be consistent with county-approved land uses. So the first finding, the proposed zone change to WR1 is in accordance with the growth policy because the proposed zoning district is the equivalent of the existing county per city policy. Again, it's secured from safety from fire, panic, and other dangers. It will be secure because city standards and zoning standards will be reviewed at the time of development on the property. Promote the public health, public safety, and general welfare. The proposed zone change, promotes public health, safety, and welfare. Again, as it's included in the city's extension of services plan. It needs to facilitate the adequate provision of transportation, water, sewage, schools, parks, and other public requirements. Again, city water is available on the property, and sewer will be extended at the owner's expense. Now that the property is in city limits, the area excluded in the extension of services plan, and the property can and will be served by public service facilities. Reasonable provision of adequate light and air. All the zoning, building code standards, and city code will be met at the time of development. The effect on motorized and non-motorized transportation systems. Lund Lane is a private street, and while increased traffic could occur with the new zoning, any impacts of transportation systems will be viewed at the time of the development. Promotion of compatible urban growth. Again, the findings, the proposed zoning designation is the closest equivalent to the city zoning, again, single family. And then consideration of the character of the district and its particular suitability for particular uses. The lot is surrounded by, county R3 zoning. It's all single family, and so this will facilitate similar uses from in the neighborhood. For conserving the value of buildings, the proposed zoning change will, conserve the value of buildings because there's no significant change in the land use permitted. It's all going to be, essentially the same from the county. Encouraging the most appropriate use of land throughout the jurisdictional area. The proposed, zone change encourages the most appropriate use of land, again, because it's consistent with the adjacent zoning. And then the historical use and established use patterns and recent change in these trends will be weighed equally in consideration, will not be given to one or the exclusion of the other. Again, the proposed zone change is consistent with historical, established, and trending use patterns of the area, which is the single-family zoning. So it is recommended that the Whitefish Planning Board adopt staff report WZC 23-01 findings of fact and recommend to this Whitefish City Council the zoning map amendment be approved.
Thank you, Nelson. Any questions for Nelson on this? Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, Nelson, is there any plan, was that 18th Street that comes up by the shop? Is there any plan to bring that through as the sewer gets extended across to Lund?
So that is the closest sewer extension. It's the closest sewer currently. And again, it would have to be reviewed at time of development, but that would be what I would assume it would have to come across from there, because that's the only sewer in there.
The sewer would come up in there. 18th Street needs to get redone. It's super steep. And then, Lund Lane is a private drive on the other side, and so it's not a public right-of-way. So even though the city would love to see those connect together, I'm not sure that would happen. If they do some kind of a development on that lot, then that may be something that happens. But it sounds like they might be just needing water and sewer for a single-family home, and they're not intending to subdivide. So,
Would they be required to connect to our services if they build a home there? Or would they be able to get a septic permit?
that's one of the reasons I think they want to annex, is they want to connect to either our water or sewer.
Okay, but they'll be responsible for the
But
extending.
if they're going to subdivide that at any point, then they would definitely have to connect, I'm sure.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. We will open the public hearing and hear from the applicant. Is the applicant here? No? What's that? Oh, the city's the applicant, sorry. Does anybody wish to speak on this matter? Okay, we will close the public hearing then, and I'll ask the board for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve WZ, what is it?
23-01.
23-01, as written with conditions and findings of fact as presented.
Second.
Okay. There's a tie for the second. Moved in second. Did you get that, Kenny? Okay. Okay. Any further discussion on this matter? Okay. Those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Like sign. That passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is WZC 23-02, a request by the City of Whitefish for a zoning map amendment due to recent annexation from Flathead County B4, HO, and SAG 5, and WCR. The property is currently developed with 2 single-family homes and is zoned Flathead County B4 and SAG 5. This one is Wendy, so is that you?
It
Dave?
was Wendy. She wrote the staff report. She is on vacation skiing in Utah apparently, so I get the privilege and the pleasure of presenting her report to you guys. So much like the last one you just saw, this was an annexation request that went to City Council. The City Council did approve the annexation, and so therefore, once a property is annexed into the city, we have to change the existing county zoning to a city zone so that we can administer zoning there. In this particular case, this property is zone B4, which is the equivalent of our WB2 zone. It's pretty much identical with a highway overlay. And then there's also a portion of the back portion of some of these parcels that have a SAG 5 with the highway overlay. And so the request is to change them to WB2, Secondary Business District, which again is our equivalent to B4, and WCR, which is the closest thing that we have to SAG 5 in the county. Drop my pen. So yeah, on February 21st, this was annexed into the city. So with regard to the WB2, it basically has the same purpose as the B4 zoning district. One of the questions that may have come up through the process of this, that if you look at our growth policy map, there's a portion of this area around the Highway 40 intersection and south of there that in our mapping of our Highway 93 South Corridor Plan shows that the future land use is business transitional. And as you guys probably remember, I don't know, it's probably been more than a year ago that you guys saw the business transitional zoning district come before you guys, and you passed that along with a recommendation for approval. Well, the City Council kicked that zoning around for 9 or 10 months and just finally adopted that in February, but it hasn't gone into effect yet, so we don't have that zoning on the books at this time. It may be on the books by the time this gets to the City Council, and they may have a different approach on it, but we couldn't necessarily recommend WBT for this just because that zoning doesn't exist. Also, these particular properties previously had a WB2 zoning on them before when the donut lawsuit kind of overturned our zoning and the county took back portions that were outside of our planning jurisdiction. They changed it to B4, but it previously was WB2. And then even stranger, we have a little bit of a discrepancy in our Highway 93 South Corridor Plan, where within the corridor plan it talks about that highway transitional designations for commercial areas south of Highway 40 along Highway 93 South. And so there's a conflict between the map and the text of the code, and we did ask the attorney about that, and generally in those cases where the text is different than the map, that the text wins out as far as the interpretation goes. And so there's a little bit of a confusion there, but as you guys probably know, the town pump property was in a similar situation across the street. They had a county B4, they previously were WB2, and then when they annexed in, they were given WB2 zoning. So we did receive a letter today at 4 p.m. from Citizens for a Better Flathead with some concerns about that process that's on the table for you guys to read. Again, this is 119, 111, and 140 Iverson Lane, and then 6010 Highway 93 South. In order to approve zone changes, we do have to look at what the state requirements are, whether it's made in accordance with the growth policy. And so we have a finding, as I kind of went over, that the proposed zone change to WCR and WB2 is in accordance with the growth policy because it complies with the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan, or at least the text of that plan. Looking at promoting public health and safety, this is in the interest of public health and safety because public services are available on Highway 93 South. Northernly part of that, we do have water and sewer that goes to the north parcel. It is included in our extension of services plan, and services can be extended if any future development occurs. We do have transportation that is connected to a major intersection of Highway 40 and 93, so traffic is not a concern as far as that goes. Whether it's the most appropriate use of land in the area. When it's a zone change like this, it is, we do have to apply city zoning to that. If that property gets developed further, they will have to go through our other public processes to look at specifically what the development is, what the zoning allows in that area, and then if it's a subdivision or any other kind of thing, that all stuff will all come through you guys to look at further and see how it meets our regulations. But staff does recommend approval based on the findings of the code, and I'd be glad to try to answer any questions that you might have. I'm sure you might have a couple.
Questions for Dave? Go ahead, Toby.
Is there construction out there?
So, yeah, they have done some site work on that site. There's no buildings constructed on there. But yeah, even if it was in the city, we don't, before there's a development project, we don't have site development standards.
Mike, Toby.
There it's on. You're on now? I'd been away for the month of February, and when I came back, Harold's Auto Repair was gone, and it was a flat piece of property with laid out in a nice square and things like that, and so I was wondering, they can do that without any approval?
Well, they're out, right, up until a couple of weeks ago, they were in the county. So any development that they did had to go through the city, the county, and I know there was some concern about this because there is a stormwater conveyance kind of wetland through there, and then they got all their permits that they needed from the Army Corps of Engineer and all that stuff. We just checked on that to make sure, even though it was outside our jurisdiction, but the developer verified that they were doing it according to the books based on the regulations that they were required to do.
I'm just curious, thank you.
Any other questions for Dave?
I think there was another letter from some of the neighbors at one point, is that right on this? And they were concerned about the access?
I think that's the property owner that's right behind, up above there, had some concerns about the easement and how their ability would be to, continue to access the highway and where that would be located.
But the reality is it's a private drive and the city.
It's a private drive and they have an easement over it. I think that, some of those questions might be best addressed to the applicant of how they're going to resolve that.
I have a question for you, Dave. So part of the story that I think is missing here is that the extension of services plan that we updated a little over a year ago encapsulated this area, right?
So
it was not.
Yes
it
and
was
no.
not in the initial.
The extension of services plan went to the south side of Highway 40. Always has shown that throughout history. There's a little sliver of this property that kind of goes a little bit south of that. And there was some question in discussions with the applicant on whether or not his entire property was within the extension of services plan. And on, in the map, in our printed version of the extension of services plan, his property was within it. When you pulled that into the GIS and got down to the minute detail of it, there's because the way the map was drawn in the paper version of it, that line that encompassed that isn't very specific. It just showed the edge of that. And so the city was a little uncomfortable, I think, including that one portion of it that's the furthest south in the extensions of services plan, because it kind of crossed that line just a tiny bit, even though it's a portion of that overall, but the majority of that property was within there. And so, we came forward and amended that plan, so it goes all the way down to Blanchard Lake Road currently. So that property is now all within there, but there was just a little bit of a sliver in there, and, I think that at the time, the city attorney was comfortable still annexing it, but there was some concerns that that little sliver of it, technically, if you really pulled it into the GIS and figured out the lines, it may or may not be, but, so we did go through that process of updating that, which, was over a year ago when we did that.
Right. And my understanding was that this was part of that extension of services plan extension when we extended it.
Yeah, again, just that little part
then
before.
My other question is, how soon after we did that extension of services plan, did the initial talks start with regard to these properties?
So, we had an initial meeting with the applicant. I would say almost 2 years ago, I can't remember the exact date, where we talked about, you know, annexing into the city, what that would entail, how far away were the services. You know, it was just kind of an initial informal meeting with, you know, Craig Workman, the Public Works Director, and, you know, talking about what the zoning might be, because Town Pump was going through their process at the time. And that's when we brought up, you know, that we might have to look at the extension of services plan. And you can see on that map, there's that one portion of it that, that lot that kind of has the triangle shape at the eastern portion of it that looks like it might go south of Highway 40. I mean, it's kind of questionable, but the way the map was drawn.
It is south of Highway 40. It looks
Yeah,
that way to me.
but I
It's
mean, when
pretty
when you
clear.
looked at the extensions of services plan, you know, it was a map that shows the entire city, and the line was thick, and so, you know, where was that boundary supposed to be located? It was really, you know.
But none of this was,
It wasn't supposed to be a parcel level map.
but none of those discussions happened before we passed the extension of services plan. That
Some of those
included-
discussions about whether we needed to, and we recommended that just for the applicant's sake, that they wait till we passed that and did the amendment to the extension of services plan. They could have applied before that. But then we did, you know, I don't remember the exact date of the extension of services plan. I can look that up, but it did get approved. I think it was 2020, 2019. Hillary was still here when that got approved, so.
Yeah, I'm not sure when it was. I think it was after the pandemic, but those years kind of blur together now.
I can tell you.
I know I was on council, so it couldn't have been 19, so sometime in 2020. Okay, the other question that I have is about, I mean, the timing here seems, it just seems really strange, because my recollection is that when council and when this board passed the extension of services plan, it was so that that anything south of Highway 40, or anything in that place where we were extending our services to, not necessarily south of Highway 40, whatever was in that extension of services update would fall into that WBT zone.
That's not entirely true, because there's some of that is a business service district zoning, which we call for in there. And that, the extension of services plan was June of 21 was when that was adopted.
Okay, yeah.
But there were other zoning considered. So yeah, I mean, you know, I think that in the past, it was always been that the WB2 would stop at Highway 40, and that was always the intent of the old extension of services plan and the old growth policy, that it wouldn't be extended south of there. I think during the process of working on the Highway 93 South plan, there was some discussion about, you know, basically applying it to all the County B4 property. But in the text, you know, I mean, I think the map might have got messed up somewhere along the line, but, you know, and certainly in staff's mind in the past, which is why, like, we never, you know, didn't really have an issue with Town Pump being B2, because it had been B2, and these properties had been B2 previously as well. And so, you know, I don't know, so there was some kind of a screw up with the map when that was developed for the 93 South plan, but it didn't
Okay,
match
well,
the text. So I think, you know, I mean, and when it,
I do
you guys
think-
certainly have the opportunity to look at a business transitional zone, but that zone doesn't exist on the books right now. So.
Right, and that will weigh into our decision tonight, I think.
Yeah.
Because my recollection is that anything that we annexed south, anything that was gonna be annexed, that was not part of the city, would come in a special district that would be different from our traditional WB2 zoning district. That is my clear recollection, being part of that whole process. So, but let's move on from that, because I'll talk about that when we get to our decision-making. Does anybody else have questions for Dave on this? Okay, so we will open the public hearing, and we can hear from, the city is the applicant on this, but I do believe the property owner is here tonight, if you'd like to come up and speak, for sure.
We almost brought our own, and we decided not to at the last minute. Good evening. I don't know all of you, but I'm Eric Payne. I'm a longtime resident and builder here in Whitefish. I'm with New West Builders. This is Jael Johnson. She's also with New West. She's going to assist this evening. I am one of the partners in this project, one of two. multiple projects encompass it, or multiple properties encompass this. My goal here this evening is to share with each of you my vision and my partner's vision for this particular property, answer any questions, answer any concerns, address any concerns, and to leave here, I hope, with a unanimous decision after we do that, that agrees with the recommendation of your own planning staff. I'm thrilled at the opportunity, honestly, to discuss this property. It is such an exciting piece of property. This particular property and the neighboring properties also went through a very contentious struggle for many years, as we all know. The struggle was over who would be responsible for its future oversight, and thus we sit here this evening. Obviously, the county won that struggle, but we're here to present formal opportunity for the city of Whitefish to take back the responsibility for that oversight. We requested it be through the WB2 zoning, as it was zoned formerly during those contentious years. During my entire discussions leading up to this, that was what I was operating under. However, as many of us have watched these same properties begin to be developed and utilized along this corridor, me in particular, these have been very disappointing. The adjoining property, much more so than others. It has really highlighted the importance of this particular intersection, I believe, to all of us. And in discussions over the last 2 years with both the planning board and the city council, I think these adjoining properties have been one of the most important reasons that we all are passionate about this decision and how these properties are used. The decision is much bigger than probably any one of us. About 4 years ago, I recognized that this particular property at the intersection of 40 and 93, which is referred to as 601093 South, was the most critical piece of property for any future growth along this corridor. With the traffic increasing along 93, gaining commercial access from MDOT was becoming a much more challenging and limiting factor for all businesses. The critical intersection of 40 and 93, I saw and believe, could alleviate many of these issues. Our goal with any future project on any of these properties is to create, first and foremost, a landmark design, one that is a model for all others along this corridor to follow. The intersection is the very entrance into Whitefish, and we do plan to represent it as just that, one that I and future generations can be proud of. Since our last meeting with the council, we have engaged Kate Walker's fabulous team at NWDS, which I think we all know more as Bruce Booty's landscape architects, to help us with the privilege of initial concepts that encompass both our vision for this style of landmark master plan as well as theirs. We will show you their concept second, with an overview first of these properties and what they potentially could be used for. Both are representative of the style project we would bring forward at some point in the future. I'm not a great public speaker, so I'll read that part first and then I'll jump over to this. So this particular property sits at 40 and 93. This represents that intersection. We have no plans whatsoever for what we would use these properties for. There have been no applications of any kind to any municipality or county agency of what we could do with this. Up to this point, our goal is simply to control and protect this intersection, honestly. We've invested a tremendous amount of money in doing so, and just in hopes that we would not have a repeat of what has gone on adjoining properties. I, in particular, I live here, I work here, my kids grow up here. I want them to be proud of what we do here. I don't want to necessarily see pot distribution stores lining this corridor. I don't want to see unmanaged, unregulated businesses going in that don't have much oversight. My investment into this property is purely to make sure it represents what we all want Whitefish to represent. The The zoning is obviously critical to us, and being able to do, a type of business in here that would be one that would be complementary to, I think we calculated over 1,000 residents within a mile of that, just in that side of Whitefish. We have the lakes, we have a lot of other newer developments that are going in along there. We want to be complementary to that. We don't want to come in and create havoc. We don't want a hut and ranch. We don't want anything like that. We want something that when you pull up to this intersection, you are in awe, you are wowed, you are thrilled to be entering into this little community of Whitefish. So that's what we're presenting to you tonight, is just, I believe when I left the city council meeting a couple of weeks ago, what I probably had not done a good job of prior to this is saying, what are you going to do with it? So we went back and we don't know 100% what we're going to do with it, but one thing I can guarantee we will do with it is maintain control of it. So the WB2 zoning that I have been understanding and working under from the very beginning that we would be requesting had never had any intention otherwise, like kind zoning and what this property is zoned before, fits simply into our overall scope of what we would want for businesses in here. We already, as you can see in addressing a question one of the members posed, is the work that has been done there. We have simply done a DEQ approved permit to manage unmanaged runoff through there. That's all we have done. The buildings that have been removed were aged buildings that were full of mold, that were not safe to utilize, so they were torn down. But basically right now we want to start with a blank canvas and determine what's going to be moved forward. But the first and most important thing to do was to start managing runoff. The runoff that was created by the properties to the south that have been poorly managed, in my opinion, we were netting the result of that. That's part of the reason we are bringing this property back to the city of Whitefish, for that oversight, for those regulations, to make sure that we don't have continuing repeats of what you're seeing as you go south on that corridor. We have started this little backage road as you come in here, and we have given access. This represents Iverson Lane right here, which we will continue to maintain and leave it there for the neighbors if that's what they want, and it appears as though they do. In addressing one of the neighbors' letters, we have incorporated that since back into our master plan. But as of right now, there is nothing in particular planned. This concept is from Kate Walker's team, and I tasked Kate with one thing: is what would you create that would represent a future development here that would be buffered from the highway, with green space, that would create a park-like feeling when you pull into it. One that is a total opposite of commercial developments in the region, in Kalispell in particular. One that you pull into and you cannot believe the beauty of the nature that is present while you're there. Not just pulling in to go get something to eat or to go visit your doctor or to get your nails done, but to be able to enjoy while you're there. Your kids can get out, walk around on walking paths, that sort of thing. This is the infrastructure that we are willing to invest in, and that any project that we bring here, we will have control of it and assure that it will meet this standard. This is a representation. We just got it back from her today because we tasked her just in the last 2 weeks to create this for us. We work with their team on almost every project that we do is a residential and commercial builder, and pretty much every project that we bring to the city, Kate and her team are part of it. So we will rely on a lot of other visions to create this, but it does represent what our overall goal is as well. So I'll end there, and I don't know if it's time for questions or not, but I'm happy to stay here or come back as more are posed.
Do we have any questions for, sorry, Mr.
Eric Payne.
Yes, Mr. Payne, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Whitney.
Hi. My question is, going from B4 to B2, if you're wanting to put in a lot of walking paths and natural area and you don't necessarily need more commercial space, why are you requesting this?
Residential space, resident,
Yeah, if you're not wanting to build more, then why do you care B4, B2? What's your, I guess, if you're wanting to have a beautiful space with a lot of walking paths, then business district-wise, what is the difference for you going forward?
well, but I'm not as familiar with WB4 as I am WB2, but WB4 would be more limiting in the type of businesses that we would be interested in bringing in here. The walking paths, the natural feel and the park-like setting that we want to create with a buffer between every business, much larger green spaces than what we're required to create would be optimal no matter what type business we put in here, but we would want to create businesses that are the limitation of WB4 and especially WBT would not fit in the overall vision of how we want to complement the surrounding communities there and the demand that we have, the request and the demand that we've heard from those surrounding communities of what would be nice on that end of Whitefish, especially during the 6 months a year that you can't get a table at the Buffalo or you can't get into the Toggery to buy a present and you can't find a parking space on Central. We just simply want to be able to complement that, and WBT or WB2 zoning is the perfect fit for that type of vision.
Yeah, let me just clarify. So right now it's zoned county B4, which is equivalent to our B2. And that, so that's what he's asking for, is B2.
So you do have an idea of the types of commercial businesses, you just don't know exactly, and you want a lot of natural land area to stay. So B2 would just give you the most options for what you want.
That's exactly right. We just open up the options for potential businesses that we would evaluate. We want to control these properties all the way to the end, which whether we would build and lease the space or lease the ground to the tenant, we would take it one tenant at a time. We will be very limiting in what's allowed to go in there. You will never see, obviously, storage units. You will never see a dispensary. You will never see a dog grooming type business or dog boarding type business. Things that I feel are very, and maybe somewhat opinionated, but more complementary of the surrounding residential community there, and one that would more represent downtown Whitefish or the type of vision that Whitefish has.
Sorry, I don't think I asked that correctly as far as from one to the other, but thank you for that answer.
Yes, ma'am.
My question, Eric, is that, at the last council meeting, you got the impression that we would rather see it be WBT rather than straight WB2, and that gives the city and our constituents more control over what actually goes in there. But essentially, they're all the same with the exception that you'd have to get a conditional use permit. Is that your only objection, is that you would just want to build by right rather than, because you can still do all those things in WBT, you'd have to go through one additional step, which would be to go through the conditional use permit process. Is that your objection to that?
So you probably caught me at a bit of advantage on WBT. I mean, I've read it, but I don't know it as well as I do WB2. It's not my understanding you'd have to put it up on the board for me to see what the conditional use permit, what is allowed under a CUP for WBT. From my recollection when I read it, I honestly was somewhat shocked by how limiting it was. I don't remember there being a lot of allowed uses under a conditional use permit. And when we all met over here in the smaller chambers, I think it was last August when that first reading of WBT had been, that I saw it, it was a year, I believe, or it was at least 9 months after we had initially put in our request for the formal extension of services. So I was not familiar at all with WBT, and when it was presented to us and other property owners in that area, I formally I presented a letter with my disappointment in it because I felt everything had been. Everything was attempting to be changed versus what the like-kind zoning was that was applied from county to city, and what our goal for the annexation and the extension of services My understanding, it was exactly as Mr. Taylor relayed it, was the majority of this property set, I think you were the one that actually asked me in the council meeting. I was not aware until I looked at that GIS that there was that sliver on that south side that was outside of the intersection, which represents a very small percentage of this overall property. My understanding of this, and I have attempted to do everything in the right way that benefits Whitefish. Bringing this back to Whitefish, I felt like was a gift, literally, that fell into all of our hands from what was taking place in the past. The city lost this property's control, and then starting to see businesses that have gone in there that don't represent what any of us want. The WBT zoning that was represented at that point, I had never heard of up until we were long into this process. From my recollection of it, the WBT zoning is drastically more limiting than WB2.
Well, drastically is a subjective word, so
Fair.
We pulled some of the uses out completely, like, for example, storage units. But I think that the intent is very similar. It's just that we moved things into a conditional use rather than a use by right. There's only a few examples that are use by right that would be in the WBT zone compared to what you'd have to go through a conditional use permit for. And part of the reason is that, you know, this area has been very contentious, as you know. So, and I don't have a side-by-side comparison of that, but that would be something you could certainly ask staff for heading into the council meeting, no matter what happens tonight, because council will eventually have final say of that. So,
Sure.
Does anybody have any other questions for Eric? Okay. Do you have anything you want to add, or for you?
Oh,
Okay.
sorry, I do have one more
Sure.
question.
Okay, go ahead.
You said that you had already smoothed things over with the neighbor who
Yes, ma'am.
uses Iverson. I believe they are the Iversons. So that you feel is not an issue because you'll allow the easement that has been happening to continue?
Yes, ma'am. That's a great question to bring up, and we briefly touched on that earlier. Anytime we do a project of any kind, this is a rare development or project that I am personally involved in. Most of our projects, 95% of them, are for another client that we simply bring before the planning board, then the council if necessary, or the planning staff or the council and the planning board. This in particular is my baby. I am here representing myself and New West and our team. We are going to create something that represents everything I've always wanted to do in a project like this in Whitefish. That immediately addresses the neighbors. This is a big traumatic change out there. Like anyone who looks at it right now, as you mentioned, you come to town, you're like, what has happened down there? But I can guarantee you when we're done, it's going to be amazing and it will represent this. The neighbors, though, don't know that. So obviously they're upset. And the letter that they submitted presents their frustration, and as it should. When we have met with them multiple times. The last meeting was with attorneys, and MDOT was present, and we tried to figure out a way to please them. We were hurled personal insults that have zero relevancy on any of this, and multiple people on my staff were present to witness it and have to be subjected to it. We continue to try to do the right thing, keep emotions out of it, give them the opportunity to partake in this and to find a silver lining in this. The silver lining is one single thing, and that is to get to that light and to get onto the highway safely, which again highlights the importance of everything we're presenting here tonight is the light. We control the access to that light. We have given them the opportunity for a like-kind easement, which would eliminate Iverson Lane entirely, and they would have a lifetime that follows after them on all these properties access to that light. We have proven to them through MDOT that their current easement across these parcels to the highway are residential use only. They believe in their mind, and this is opinion, but we have multiple experts that are smarter than me there to hear it, that that's an unlimited easement. So they should be able to do anything with it. MDOT stated, and would verify to anyone here, that if they try to use that lane for anything other than a residential, single-family home, they would be denied. And they will be required soon to be a right turn only off of Iverson Lane. We would like to avoid that. We have given them the opportunity in writing through their attorney and them direct to give them forever use of coming down our new road from their house, which is right here, to come in, turn on our new hot road and come out to the light, right like this, and they can go any direction. They've refused it.
Was this talk with them after their March 2nd letter to us?
It was prior.
addressing- It was, okay. It was
Yeah, the
before
letter, we
that.
got a copy of that letter too, and it completely, completely negates everything that was said in the meeting out there.
So
It made
things
no
are
sense.
not smoothed over? You're
No,
just
not at
saying
all.
that there's a misunderstanding between their right that you've granted them and then what they believe it actually is?
Well, there's nothing been smoothed over other than, and they see things totally different than what, in my opinion, is the reality. The reality is they have an access across these properties through Iverson Lane to the highway. That will be there forever if that's what they choose to keep. We're going to give them that. And we've now incorporated in the last 2 weeks, Iverson Lane to remain. MDOT would likely require a secondary egress point on this property anyhow. So we will simply use Iverson Lane for that, and they will have access. Gladly, we will give them access to that light informally forever. Them, their kids, everyone they know. They're VRBOing one of the houses, that we don't care about any of it. What I will not do under any circumstance is give them commercial access to that light. And my main goal in doing that was to limit things that the county approves, but the city won't, such as storage units, trailer parks, and miscellaneous things that none of us want. If I were to grant that access, they could do anything they want on their property that the county approves. And we all have seen the results of being able to do what the county approves out there. I don't want that.
I just wanted to address it since it was a letter that we got, but I think that's clear enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Whitney.
ma'am.
Anything else for Eric? Okay, thanks, Eric.
Yes, sir.
And
Thank you,
sorry, I
everyone.
didn't get your name.
This is Jael.
Jael, thank you. Okay, anybody else wish to speak on this matter? All right, we'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board for possibly more discussion or a motion.
Reading here, WBT zoning goes into effect on March 21st. That's for sure now?
That's correct, yep.
I guess I should just provide a little more context about the last city council meeting where we approved the annexation of these properties, and it became clear that a lot of times annexations go through on our consent agenda and nobody notices them, but this property in particular is, as Mr. Payne has told us, and we are all aware of, has been pretty contentious over time, especially at that corner. All the properties around that corner are, it's tough, and the property just to the south of there is an eyesore that keeps getting more sore. So the discussion that we had at the meeting was, because this property is in that, what we felt was part of the extension of services that we further extended in June of '21, that potentially a more appropriate zone would be WBT for that. That was the discussion that the council had. That does not exist yet, so we cannot make that recommendation. We could potentially put this off until the next planning board meeting, which at that point we could recommend WBT. But at the next council meeting, I believe, no, it won't be will be in effect by the next council
It will be
meeting?
in effect when it gets to city council
Okay,
on
so
April 3rd.
When it gets to city council, the council could just change the zoning. So the way that zoning requests work is that the council has the ultimate decision over what zone it gets. Staff makes a recommendation, council decides, and we have, there are some rules we need to play by, and findings that we need to make, but council has the ultimate say in what something gets rezoned to. And so the question is WB2 or do we wait? That's really the question. Do we approve this request, or is it something that we wait on? Or, because we can approve it and council can still change it. So that's the question. And Mr. Payne has been very patient, and I applaud you for your patience and understanding in this. And I think, the whole city is confused about what's supposed to go on down there. And we've been trying very hard. That's why it took us 2 years to finally come through with a WBT zone that made sense. And by moving everything into a conditional use, it allows the citizens to have more say in what actually develops down there. And that is the key point of all of this consideration, because if it's annexed into the city, we want to be sure that we get what we want down there. And these properties are now annexed into the city, and so the question is, B2 has a lot of uses by right. BT, most of the uses have to go through the conditional use permit process. So that's kind of the long story there, and I appreciate your patience with this, Mr. Payne. I certainly do.
Well,
Go ahead.
with regard to this, if we're having board discussion here,
Your voice?
it's on.
Okay.
What's the potential of, say, we pass it as is with WB2, but then with an amendment or a recommendation to the city council to change that to WBT? Since they can, since then it will exist at that point in time.
I don't think that, I've never seen anything like that before. I guess, they can read through the minutes, the city council will read through the minutes of our discussion. And if we say, we're passing this so that the ball can get moved forward rather than delay it another month, but we would rather see BT, that would come through in the minutes, but I don't know that we can make a recommendation like that.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to apply some kind of zoning because we annexed it, but, certainly if you, recommend approval, but for the city council to consider, a alternative zoning district from the B2.
So we could put that in a motion or an amendment?
Yeah, I guess we could make that part of our motion to pass. I don't know how that would work, though.
On
Go
the
ahead, Whitney.
table also is just making a motion to postpone until after March 21st. So next meeting, we would be talking about this in real time instead of this split with us sending something to council saying, but if you guys think, it wouldn't be a true approval or a true denial if we're doing it based on waiting for something that we know will happen, but we're not actually, we're not recommending anything.
We'd just be postponing it.
So we should just postpone it if that's what we prefer to do.
Well, the question then becomes, are we up against any time limits?
Well, it's in the city now, but it doesn't really have a zoning, and so we
Right.
can't determine anything on it, like what's allowed and what isn't, until there's a zoning applied, so.
Right. And then the other thing would be that, I'm pretty sure Eric wants kind of a definitive answer one way or another. He's been in this process for a while, and maybe another month is not that big a deal, but it probably feels like another month in purgatory to him, so.
From my understanding of what the applicant just said, it sounds like all of this is going to take some time, happy to sit on it, making some plans, but not really sure. I don't think that, and this is me not being involved in your personal business, but from the city end, I would rather see more public input on what happens on something that's been annexed into the city through a PUD process, even though it may be arduous. And I would hope to believe that anything that the applicant would pick would make all of us feel so happy inside, that we would never have to see the plans before and you'd have a use by right. But now that it is in the city and it will be, within the realm of transitional zoning, I would prefer to wait,
Okay.
postpone.
Well, let's get a motion on the table then, and then,
Then I'll make a motion to postpone until next meeting.
okay, it's moved and seconded to postpone until the next meeting. Whitney, do you want to finish up your thoughts there on that, or did you get it all out?
I think that was enough.
Okay.
Thank you.
Allison?
I agree. I think it's an area that there will be a lot of public comment around, and I think that'd be most appropriate to have those discussions.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak to this motion? Okay. Just one last question for Dave. So really nothing can be done if it doesn't have zoning, or can anything be done if there's no zoning?
Well, I mean, it puts us in an awkward position. I don't know what our status is if there's no zoning on it. I mean, it's still technically B4 until we change the zoning. So then the question is can we administer county zoning? Because all the uses that are allowed in B4 would be continue to be allowed until the zoning was changed.
Well, it sounds to me like Eric's not interested in starting a big project and trying to throw mud in the eye of the city based on everything he just said. He wants it to represent the best of Whitefish. So
Yep.
I know it probably feels not the greatest for you, Eric, but I think that would be our best outcome tonight, in my opinion, is to postpone this until we can actually recommend the zoning. And there's a chance we would go back to the B2 zoning. You could come back and make another case for that as well. So I agree with, I would support this motion. Anyone else? Okay, those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed, nay. Okay, passes unanimously. Thanks, Eric. Appreciate your patience and persistence in this. That brings us to our third item on the agenda, WZC 23-03, a request by Honorbound LLC for a zoning map amendment to an 11.12 acre portion of Lot 7A from WCR special conditions to WER special conditions, matching the underlying future land use of suburban residential, with the special conditions providing additional 5-foot setback from the required off of Park Knoll Lane, and a provision that only single-family housing would be developed directly adjacent to Park Knoll Lane, west of the future Baker Avenue extension. Dave.
Hang on one sec. I'm just putting the map up for you. All right, so this is a request by Carter Unger and Honorbound LLC to do a zoning map amendment of an 11.12 acre portion of a total lot that's 31.17 acres and is currently undeveloped. If you see on that map, you can't see the whole rest of the portion on there, but it's just an L-shaped part of that lot that if you look on the future land use map, has a suburban residential overlay over it. And then the majority of that has a rural residential overlay in the future land use map. And so what he's asking you to do is take that L-shaped portion and change the zoning, which on the overall parcel right now is WCR with a special conditions overlay, which is our 2.5 acre maximum lot size country residential zone, and then change that L-shaped portion to WER, which is our estate residential zoning district, with the special conditions overlay. And that WER is a suburban residential zone that has a 20,000 square foot minimum lot size. So as I mentioned, it is undeveloped. There is a seasonal freshwater emergent wetland that runs through a portion of that property. Quite a bit of water runs down it in the spring, and then it gets dry in the summertime. So it's kind of a seasonal stream. And now that this property is in city limits, we have, our water quality ordinance has setback requirements that would be required off of that, and other considerations, if and when there is any development around that. It's, on the north of that is WAWLR, and Assembly of God Church, and then to the south is County SAG 5 acre rural, and then directly to the east of that is some additional WER suburban residential property. We put a public notice out. We received one notice from someone in Park Knoll Lane that was concerned about the zone change, and we also received a letter from the Park Knoll Homeowners Association. They had some concerns about it, said they couldn't support the zone change, so they knew more information about what was going to be developed there in the future. And then since the report came out, there were 2 additional emails that came in, and both of those are on the dais that you guys can look at with concerns about the zone change. So looking at the findings of fact, and this was included in our Highway 93 corridor plan. That corridor plan, when it was adopted, it did update and amend our growth policy, so it's the acting growth policy document for that area. And that calls for a suburban residential future land use, which this WER zoning district is a suburban future land use. So this zone change is consistent with our growth policy. It secures from fire, safety, panic, and other dangers, because city engineering standards and zoning standards will be renewed or reviewed at the time of any development when that is going to be developed in the future. The applicant has stated that, you know, it's part of an overall plan. He does own the property that's to the east of that, and future Baker Avenue area. And so, you know, at some point, this whole property will come in for a development plan that you guys will be able to review. Proposed zone change promotes public interest, health, and comfort, and general welfare. Because public services are available nearby, the area is included in the city's extension of services plan. And then water and sewer and other services will be extended in the future as development occurs. As far as transportation goes, it's inside city limits. It can be accessed by public service and facilities. There are existing roads that will access that property when it is developed. Currently, it is undeveloped. You know, JP Road will eventually serve this property, as well as Hedman Lane, you know, which does have access to Highway 93 South. It's compatible with urban growth. It is consistent with our growth policy future land use map. It's consistent with the suburban residential property that's adjacent to that. And based on all those findings, staff does recommend approval of the zone change. And the applicant is here if you have specific questions in more detail.
I have a question for you, Dave. Based on what is there, so there's the big L-shaped piece that is the whole entire property, right? And we're just, that, yeah, the outlined in red there. They're
Right,
outlined
so
in
that
purple.
one you can kind of see it better. That's the existing zoning,
Yeah.
or the, yeah,
So
that was the, actually, I think that's the old zoning map before it was changed recently, but, yeah,
okay, so,
I don't think that one's
but
accurate.
we're just talking about the little L piece that looks like is almost totally encumbered by this seasonal
Yep.
wetland. And we're changing all of that from WCR, so the stuff that's in purple that goes to the edge of the, I'm just trying to figure out which piece of property we're talking about here.
Yeah,
We're talking
so-
about 7A on the map,
Yep,
right?
if you look at that, I mean, it's just that L-shaped portion of that overall
Okay,
big piece.
and that's the part that's almost totally encumbered by the wetland, right?
Yep,
Okay, and we're changing that from WCR to WER.
yep.
Because
And he can explain his intention on why he wants that change,
Okay.
but, I mean, I'm
All right.
sure it's to help facilitate, you know, more affordable housing and whatnot next to Baker Avenue, and just to get that little bit of extra density.
But on the map that shows the wetland, the big chunk that's to to the right, or to the north and to the east, shows that it's WCR currently, but that's not accurate.
Yeah, that map is wrong. That's the old zoning map. I
Okay.
don't know why I didn't get the updated one, but,
Okay, so that's WER, that.
yep, that is WER now. That map, yeah, is definitely not right.
Okay, thank you. That was my question. Any other questions for Dave?
So when he annexed in, that was this was the previous map, but yeah, it changed to WER when, he came in for the annexation of that property. And with the special conditions zoning, so he added a 5-foot setback off of Park Knoll Lane and with a promise in the zoning that it would only single-family development or single-family residences would be developed adjacent to Park Knoll, like directly adjacent to that.
So,
I apologize for this map because it's not right.
Go ahead,
are
Tom.
you done?
That's the accurate zoning map.
So, the portion that we're changing is that L-shaped piece,
Yep.
which is very narrow at the top of the L, and then wider at the bottom. But if we superimpose that onto the purple L-shaped piece, would it be directly up against the western edge of that?
The western edge goes far beyond to the left.
Yeah.
I mean, that one more accurately shows that overall parcel, but,
So where would this
so you can see where that,
narrow L, where
where
would
the
it fit in that?
so where the green portion of Park Knoll Drive is at that top part of that map,
Oh,
you see that green, that's the boundary line
All right.
of that, and it goes straight down all the way down,
Okay.
north to south down that lot.
All right. I see it now. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Dave?
So it's just this one.
Okay, let's open the public comment, and the applicant can come up and speak first, yep. And name and address for the record, please.
Councilor Quinnell, board members, thank you very much for having me. My name is Carter Unger. I semi-reside at 2375 Mountain Shadows Drive. My father-in-law is the actual true resider, but that's where I spend about a third of each month here. And I am grateful to be before you today and happy to answer any questions after. Would like to provide a little bit of a backstory and hopefully maybe clear up some of this confusion was, if that would be all right. And David, if possible, could you go down to the growth policy plan? I feel it makes it a little bit clear. So, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but just out of the sake of clarity, in June 2nd or June 3rd, I closed on the lot you see outlined in red, which is 31 acres, as well as the lot to the east of it, which is where you see the suburban residential written, as well as the orange. The city was the applicant, and in fact, I believe the application and from the old owners who went through some contentiousness with some of the neighbors, had put in for annexation, and to be completely honest, and I like to sometimes show my own stupidity, when I closed on it, I didn't even realize it had been annexed like the week before. So I was the new owner, and the city was then, on the following meeting, the applicant on annexation. And doing the standard, closest like zoning, made that entire section of 31 acres, 2.5 acre WCR rural zoning. If I was the one that was the applicant at the time, I would not have done that. I would have requested that green section, as you see there, which is 20 acres to remain 2.5 acre rural. And then I would have evened out that exact rectangle that you see there with the hockey stick or the golf club. The top right corner is WER. I rezoned that as the applicant. And now I'm coming before you to request to finish it out. It is my opinion, and obviously my opinion doesn't mean anything, and so you all get to decide if this is accurate or not. But at a base zoning level, we're looking at the type of use and the density of use. We can take off the table discussing anything commercial, anything apartments, anything retail, hotel. This is only single-family residential that we're discussing. So that's kind of the easier one to take off the table. And then you have density. While this one application is for that 11 acres, I am looking at both lots for the total of 50 to try to find the right compromise that's right. I don't believe I need to remind anybody up here, as you all know this far better than I, there's some real pain going on right now in this town. And I feel a belief by most of the people I've gotten to know and meet, and I've tried to do as many open houses as possible. I've tried to be as open as possible. I have engaged actively, and probably a lot of people think I'm a weirdo because of how much I will engage on Facebook, but it seems to be a way I can connect to people. We need a mix. Like any good ecosystem, you got the pond scum at the bottom, and the tadpoles eat that, and we've got great, beautiful houses on the mountain around the lake, and they are an important part of the ecosystem of this amazing tourist destination. But we also need other options for housing for the other people that are also equally as important. In a way, I'm not requesting a growth policy change. The last group that owned the land went through a couple iterations. I couldn't speak to why they made the decisions they made. Those aren't what I'm trying to do. There will be no apartments in the back. Again, I'm leaving 20 acres. And while we are only speaking on 11.2 acres, I do want to give the full context. If this is approved, I will be left with a 50-acre assemblage, 20 acres of which is 2.5-acre minimums, 20 of which would be WER, as you see there in the yellow, in line with the corridor plan of half acres. And then I would have 10 acres of smaller WR2. I believe this is a good mix. I could make an argument that we should be doing a growth policy amendment. Smaller lots are massively important. Most of the fine folk I meet couldn't afford a 2.5-acre lot, and I can't afford to sell them a 2.5-acre lot. So my intent is not to do a bait and switch, and there's been some letters that have come in that suggested I already rezoned this 31 acres, and now I'm coming back for more. And I think there was some confusion. The letter from Lindsay Ramadka, really sorry if I messed that up. She's been great to talk with. She's been very open and communicative with me. She's been, I've had nothing but a good experience with her. But I do, and I apologize, have to point out a couple things that I disagree with that I would have rather done in advance, but I just got this. I was not the applicant, the city was. I am not trying to do bait and switches. I'm not trying to piecemeal come in bit by bit. What I'm trying to do is make a clear path that all the citizens can understand. Right now I'm doing the base zoning, and if this base zoning is approved, then that's set, and I will come in with a site plan that hopefully is valued and respected. I will not be trying to shrink the wetlands, and in fact, my plan is to enhance them. I would like to just share a few things with you all, if that's appropriate for me to bring to the table. And I certainly don't think I need to show you all. You'll know where the community's at and how they're hopeful for some better options. I also did a poll on Facebook. Not the most exact. Sorry. I did a quick poll on Facebook, and while not exact science and nothing special, 76 people responded to a question of what is the most appropriate size lot that Whitefish needs. Very few believed they needed more 2.5-acre lots. The vast majority, 70-something% of 76 participants, said half-acre or less. So what I'm trying to do is get this mix, and I'll have 20 acres of 2.5, 20 acres of half-acre, and 10 acres of WR2, which can be a couple different things. The wetlands are important. They're special. And in some of the letters, you know, I hate to say this, but it's a seasonal intermittent stream that a lot of it comes from the runoff of 93. If you look at these plans, which I'll drop off with you, it starts at the 40 with wetlands that are emergent, and then it is funneled before the new EPA rules or city rules, and I apologize for not knowing the right terminology. Great Northern kind of restricted it in, and that shows also wetlands. And then it comes out of Great Northern, and on my property, it becomes emergent wetland again. So we've got two different type of wetlands that start at the base of the 93 where the runoff comes, and it's not the cleanest. And I would like to enhance it. I'd like to clean it up. I'd like to make it open and have a trail system along it that can connect all the way to the park. But right now, I can't get into any of those detailed site planning before I know what I have to work with. Plus, you all are such a popular city that all the civil engineers are tied up and can't begin to work on it. So that's a good thing. But this, me developing around the wetlands and adding to the buffer zones that the city requires, and then using this set density to blend around and create the right use is my intent. This is all future and what I hope to show you on a plan. But my goal is to kind of try to create a horseshoe of 2.5 acre lots or larger around the perimeter that buffers to those neighbors. The neighbors to my north, Park Knoll, have been awesome. I consider David Hunt, the HOA president, a friend. And as we get further in this process, it's going to be hard for me to make sure, not hard, it's going to be something I want to keep. And I'm going to keep working with him. The neighborhood to the south has been great. And the neighbors to the south are 1/4 acre lots. The neighbors to the north are 1 acre lots. My neighbors to the west off Carrer are 2.5 acre zoned lots. So I don't feel I'm pushing the envelope. This is exactly in line, and why it's 11.2 acres is I took the exact city plan, and that's what I followed. I'm going to drop this off, but so I'm not trying to talk and run, and I apologize for getting long-winded.
Yeah, I think maybe if we have some questions for you, that might be helpful.
Awesome. If not here, where? We need more housing. You know, everything east of the 93 and east of Whitefish is red as in high water. So if 1/2 acre lots and 2.5 acre lots aren't appropriate here, I don't know how we ever start to build some more neighborhoods that regular folk can afford. And I'll leave it at that unless you have any questions.
Any questions for Carter? My only question is the WR2, is that going to be adjacent to the Baker Avenue extension? Is that where those will be?
Yes, sir. So if I could point to the screen behind you, and maybe you've got it in front of you.
We do. Yeah.
The WR2 is the orange Don Carl Schmidt, or if I'm saying that wrong again, I'm sorry, I'm
Don K,
nervous.
yes.
Owns all the land directly north of Great Northern. And then I own that orange that you see west of that commercial dogleg looking piece. And so my goal is to bring the hockey stick in line with the WER, that's the yellow top right square. And then Baker, I am going to try to push as far east as possible, which is in line with what both neighborhoods, north and south, want. I'm working through that. Some of the other property owners, I guess, don't have immediate plans, and so I'm kind of going about that myself, and therefore can only put it on land I own. So I will go as far east as possible to Baker, but it won't be as far as perhaps once envisioned.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Carter. Any questions for Carter?
What do you have planned for workforce housing?
So my long-term goal with the site plan, and again, you know, I'm waiting on preliminary Baker civil engineer layout stuff, but you know, the 2.5 acre lots, the 20 acres of that are clearly not going to be close to affordable. The 1/2 acre lots, my goal is to try to make it as market as possible and affordable to that missing middle. And then on the WR2, which while not part of this application is 100% part of the big picture and happy to talk about, my plan is to hopefully do some duplexes or use the PUD to maybe do it differently, have a little bit more height or density on Baker and leave more open space, but to keep that as a for rent product. Well, I can't even talk about that. I have another lot that I'm under escrow on. That I can't tell you about. That is my plan for the true apartments.
to this application as
But
much
yeah,
as possible.
I'm
But
sorry.
It
Apologies.
helps to hear the big picture, it does.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for Carter? Okay.
Yeah, I'd like to touch one more on
Okay.
the, excuse me, on the wetland.
Yes, sir.
It appears that this little flag lot that we're creating here, the one that's in yellow there, encumbers most of the wetlands. So what's the benefit of having the zoning density increased on that area when the high groundwater may limit your density abilities?
So if you all pass this and it moves forward, and if the city council approves it, the base zoning, whether there's unbuildable cliffs, intermittent streams, streets that have to go in certain places, I'm establishing the base zoning overall. So then I have, 40 half-acre lots, 8 2.5-acre lots that I can play with and move around, and hopefully create as much of an open wildlife corridor / pedestrian hiking area through those wetlands. I hired, and I promise you, I will email all of you the name of their company. They're not shills. They don't come in to try to dumb things down. They used to teach the Army Corps of Engineer courses on wetlands. They've come out. They believe the packet will be seen by the Army Corps of Engineers in the next couple months. I got them out as soon as possible. And I believe if you look them up, you'll see that they're not just the developer hire types. The wetland is, I want to make it a true wetland. And right now it's not. And you can talk to the church. The picture that likes to be used from 2017, the tube that went underneath the street of Lamb Drive was completely clogged. It was an unseasonal extra amount, and it did get backed up. I want to clean that up. I want to take some of that density and move it around. And if you look at, if approved, on what I would have if this piece is approved, if I took that density and then spread it across the 50 acres, it's 0.4 acres per lot. And to me, a half-acre lot is not too much. Now, my plan is to use larger lots to buffer the neighbors and to protect them. They're used to seeing a certain lifestyle, and I don't want to mess with that. But I also want to provide housing that people can afford. Most of the friends I've met here can't afford acre-plus lots. And so my goal is to come up with a creative plan with how to use this total base density across the entire site, provide more affordable options, perhaps over in the WR2, leave more open in the back, certainly along the wetlands. And I guess that's my answer, sir.
Okay, thanks, Carter. Yep, you're good. We might call you back up, but. Lindsay? It's your turn, I think.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Ramadka with Weinberg and Ramadka, P.O. Box 652 Whitefish. So I represent the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association, which you have received our letter that shows a couple pictures that you guys have obviously seen. I just want to say that we would not be commenting tonight in opposition to this if it wasn't for the wetlands. So that is our number one concern. That's why we think the zoning is inappropriate here. And Scott, you brought up kind of the point, why are we increasing the density on this area where the wetlands primarily are? It doesn't make sense. The existing zoning is WCR, which is suburban residential, and it already complies with the growth policy. So I just want to clear that up, because when I read through the staff report, it looked like WER would comply with would be the only thing that complies with the growth policy, but the existing zoning already does. So Dave Taylor said earlier that the wetlands dry in the summer, and we took drone footage. Well, we've been taking drone footage since this amendment to change the growth policy back in, I think it was 2017, of the wetlands, and it does not dry up until July. So this is a big wetlands. It's wet, and if you know anything about Great Northern, they are also used to be in the path of the wetlands, and they have high groundwater issues, water in their basement because they were developed over this wetland. Back in 2017, and I think, Steve, you were actually on the planning board for this, and so I'm sure you remember, but.
Probably.
Yeah, you were, I think. So back in that, it was a growth policy amendment, they did a wetland delineation and we never saw it. But you can see a picture of it in our comments. They said in their wetland delineation that it was 14 acres of the 31 acres. So it's a huge part of this 31 acres. And it's, when you have a wetland it's that big and it's that wet, it doesn't make sense to have WER zoning. Frankly, it doesn't make sense to have WCR zoning, and we were opposed to the city's annexation several months ago. I think if there was going to be any kind of zone change on this property other than what has already happened, there needs to be a wetland delineation in front of you guys so you see what we're working with. The growth policy is really clear that we need to preserve our ecosystems, and wetlands are extremely important, and as our regulations in Whitefish protect, we need to do our best to plan around them. The last thing I would say is that these neighborhoods, like Park Knoll was opposed to this. So I know that Carter and Dave Hunt might be friends, but Park Knoll is ultimately opposed. The folks on the South Whitefish Neighborhood Association board, there are members of Great Northern and homeowners directly south of this property. And I can't speak for Great Northern, but I will say the people that I know that are a part of Great Northern are opposed to this too. So just please keep that in mind. I know I'm the only one speaking tonight, and this is the most empty planning board meeting I've ever been in, actually. So that's all my thoughts. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, anyone else wish to speak on this matter? No? Okay. I'll give you another minute to respond to anything quickly, please.
I would encourage you to please read the letter from the president of Park Knoll. They were in support of the vast majority of the land that abuts them, that has already been rezoned to WER. Talking with them without having these final certain details, they said at this moment we can no longer be in support or opposed of this change, and look forward to working with me to hopefully have those answers by the time it goes to council. But I just wanted to clear up that, in my opinion, if you read the letter, they are not opposed. And I wish I could get some of this information back sooner. What the wetlands are, the wetlands will be protected, plus setbacks and some. It's a matter of what do we want to be able to offer as far as sizes of lots across the entirety that I'm asking for.
So I guess I do have a question for you, Carter. Is that, if you take this piece and you get it zoned to a higher density, your overall 50 acres, if you choose to do a PUD, you can get more dense in areas that you can actually build on. Is that your ultimate goal?
Where they're more appropriate, closer to the 93, maintain more open space and larger lots closer to the neighbors who are concerned about the loss. Right. It wouldn't be hard for me to sell a bunch of 5-acre lots to a bunch of out-of-town folks that would love to have these wetlands. I'd rather do the right in between. Maintain the open space, maintain the wetlands, enhance it, and push the density to the east, and use the PUD, not to request any more density, but to use this now set base density to create the best plan that works best for all the neighbors.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll close the public hearing now and ask the board for a motion, please. Okay, go ahead, Toby.
I make a motion that we approve WZC 23-03 as written by the staff.
I'll second it for sake of discussion. Go ahead, Toby, would you like to speak to your motion?
No, I feel that, I understand what he's doing here, or what he's spoken that he wants to do, which is consolidating his property so that he can divide it up appropriately with the 2.5 acre lots, and then the half-acre lots, and then the smaller lots for development of hopefully rental housing, for affordable rental housing. And on the half-acre lots, you know, a half acre is still probably larger than a lot of people's entry home designation or affordability, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think that I also understand that with the zoning as he's requesting here, that does allow him to move around the half-acre lots and perhaps his smaller designations so as to make this wetland through there be an appropriate park, walkway, easement, whatever you want to call it, to enhance the community area. And so that's why I can't see a voting against it. It sounds good. I think he has good intentions.
Thanks, Toby. Anyone else wish to speak on this matter? Go ahead, Whitney.
I do not support this increased density in this area. I went back and looked through the last meeting where we did the zoning for this, you know, really listened to Parknell, listened to concessions made, you know, on your end as an applicant, or well, as zoning, I guess the city is truly the applicant, but, and that was a little bit of a struggle just because of the, you know, we're adding density in an area. Yes, we do need housing, but this is, from everything that we've seen, read, heard, it is a wetland. There's some question in my mind as to whether it will even be treated as a wetland, you know, depending on what sources are used and how it comes down and how the property is divided. You know, it's intermittent wetland, yes or no. It still is at some points. And I think that allowing an increased density, because it's not something that is necessary, it may make it easier to figure out, but I don't think that that's necessarily on us as a planning board to allow a greater density to make it easier to move parcels around. I think that that's possible to happen without allowing greater density. So I'll be voting to deny this.
Anyone else wish to speak on this? Go ahead, Scott.
I was concerned about the wetland to begin with, but I think what we're going to see is when you submit your subdivision plan for pre-plat, final plat, whatever, you're going to have designated park areas. That stuff's going to have to be in place, and you know, at that point, if you want to do cluster development in certain areas of it for PUD, by way of that, I think there's a way to make it work. And I think doing the zoning increase for you now allows you that overall higher density that will also allow you to have more park area. And, you know, I know this land. I've been up all over it from the church all the way down. This whole wetland goes right down to the last property we just worked on in here today. And they did some mitigation down there by Highway 40. So, yeah, I think I'm okay with it. We'll get there.
Okay.
But
I'll say a couple things. One, it's not lost, it shouldn't be lost on anyone here, and I don't think it is, that housing is our number one priority in this town currently, as it should be. The other thing is that, you know, this could be zone WR4, and you're not going to be able to build in the wetland anyway, no matter what the density is. You're not going to be able to build there. I do appreciate having a bigger perspective on what the plan is for this area. We shot down a PUD that would have pretty much taken this whole area out of the potential for being part of a development project. And now we're kind of piecemealing it back together, and it's coming in one piece at a time, which is not good planning. And so I appreciate the fact that you do have a big vision for that whole section there, and I think that by increasing the zoning, that does, or by increasing the density of 11 acres of the 50 acres does get us to a more appropriate sized lot that we can actually build on and have a mix of housing, which is what we need. And I don't have, so I don't object to it on that. Of course, we're sensitive to water quality here, we're sensitive to wetlands, and whatever comes back, it's not going to be buildable in the wetland anyway. So, and I also do need to say that, the people that live up there object to everything that goes on down there. They have not come in and said yes to anything. So I think that, and I get that, there's a lot of angst over change, especially in that area. And we have to, as a community, come together and understand when we have a big picture to provide more housing and a mix of housing, we have to find a way to get it done, or we're not going to ever have housing in this town that is affordable. So that's all I have to say.
Just if it's an appropriate time for questions, Steve, I just want to remember, and maybe for everyone's knowledge, it would be helpful, the PUD that you mentioned before that was denied, can you just remind me of that one? I just am not remembering.
That encompassed almost that whole area, didn't it, Dave? Like
yeah, all the way to
from
the
JP.
highway, and then, yep, and they were gonna, extend Baker Avenue and
Yep.
all the way to JP Road.
Application?
What's that?
I can't remember that at all, it's weird.
But that was just a growth policy amendment.
Okay.
So they didn't actually submit a plan for, or PUD for that. They just applied for a growth policy amendment to change the future land use map in order to accommodate, some affordable housing along Baker and other lots. And that, on a close vote, was denied by the council at the end of the time.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are we ready to vote? Those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Passes 5-1 with Whitney in opposition. Okay, thank you. Next item, last item on our agenda tonight is WZTA 23-02, zoning text amendment to clear up our zoning and annexation policy. Dave.
Helps if I turn my mic on. So we had several work sessions over the last year or so with the city council about our annexation policy. Right now that's contained within our extensions of services plan. One of the things we talked about is, how do we eliminate one of the issues that we saw tonight, which is where a property annexes into the city, but yet the zoning, stays out there, and we may not be able to administer it for a couple months, 2 or 3 months. And when we looked around the state, and the city of Missoula was using something that's currently in the Montana Code annotated, which is the ability to do a zoning upon annexation, which gives the city council the ability, when someone annexes in, they make a decision about the zoning and then annexation at the same time, because we have to apply zoning to it. And it's a quicker process, and it happens simultaneously. And so in order to do that and to make it so that the council has that option when someone requests to annex, we had to amend our zoning code to add a new section in our code, which is zoning upon annexation. And so what we're asking for is this basically to amend the code to add a second process for annexation, or for zone changes when they're associated with annexation. So basically, I kind of covered most of the gist of it, but it would add some, timing of that. Under state law, in order, when annexation comes in and when you look at the zoning, there's basically 3 criteria. Is the land use or the zoning comparable to what the county zoning was before? Does it authorize land uses consistent with land uses approved by the county commissioners or board of adjustments? So that means if there's existing conditional use permits on there, whatever existing uses are happening on that lot, the zoning that the city applies has to be consistent with that. And then the last one is it consistent with the growth policy of the city? So all 3 of those things have to be met for zoning, and so those are the criteria that have to be used, when the council does approve it and when staff makes recommendations, for new zones to come in. But it gives the ability for them to do interim zoning. So possibly applying a zoning district, knowing that that's going to change in the future, or giving the applicant an opportunity to come forward and ask for something different if he doesn't like what the council applied. And so then, you know, with this process, it would go through, the council would initially pass a resolution of an intent to annex and assign a zoning. And then at that point, we would, you know, put notices in the paper, notify the neighboring property owners, and then we would hold a public hearing. And at that public hearing, the council would make a decision on whether to annex and apply the zoning. So that's the gist of it. It does, you know, meet our growth policy requirements, and the other thing for all the other criteria for zone changes. I'm not going to read all those. You guys can have them in your packet. If you have questions, you can certainly ask them, but staff does recommend approval of this amendment.
So my only question is does that mean it doesn't come to planning board?
It does not come to
anymore?
planning board.
Okay.
It goes straight to council.
I'm sure we'd all be sad to lose the oversight of.
Yeah, well, it's either going to be with the equivalent zone of what it was in the county, or if the growth policy calls for something different, then whatever that is.
Or the applicant can petition to.
Yeah, I mean, they can ask for something, and if it seems reasonable, then, and if staff supports that, then we could ask for that. Yep.
Okay.
I comment on zoning would, so that debate or comment would go to city council. We just wouldn't see it here.
It would be at the council hearing, yeah. So there's a public hearing on that. Sorry, I can't hear your mic very well, but.
I'm sorry, it's my fault. Okay, just making sure. So just skip us is all. Yeah.
Anybody wish to speak on this matter? Okay. Sorry, I have to officially open the public hearing. Anyone wish to speak on this matter? No. I will close the public hearing and ask the board for a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve WZTA 23-02 as presented with the amendments for changing the zoning application, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. Do I have a second? Okay, moved and seconded. Allison got that one as well. You're keeping score at home. Any further discussion? Those in favor, raise your hand. Opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously. And that concludes our public hearings for this evening. On to item G of our agenda, which is good and welfare from, so matters from the board. Any matters from the board?
I'd like to request if we could get these packages possibly earlier. Is that possible?
You're talking about the staff reports?
Yeah.
I mean, we send you the agenda. Every agenda is linked to all the staff reports and the public comment
Can
and
you
the
print 'em
application.
out?
You want a paper copy? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that was something that the city council and this board voted to go strictly paperless in order to save trees several years ago. If you want a paper copy, we're happy to make you one.
Can I be the one person that gets a paper
Yeah.
copy? That'd be great.
But yeah, if you want to have a paper copy of the stuff, we can print one for you. I think some of our staff might complain about that, but we can do that.
Pay more than we do on this.
On the bigger ones, be judicious on what you actually print out. Maybe just the staff report. Is that fair?
And we always do bring them to the meeting, so you should be a copy at every meeting, just in case somebody forgot to read it. But you know,
Yeah.
but it would be the Thursday before the planning, so a week before the meeting, we could have a copy.
Any other matters from the board? Just something that, for future reference, if there could be a zoomed out view of where properties are. I know there is a bit of a zoomed out view, but one that clearly shows the roads, because sometimes I always have to go into Google Maps and kind of figure out, okay, where is this place based on what you can barely read on the road map,
Right.
the maps of the road. If there's a way to get a zoomed out picture as well, kind of showing at least the general quadrant of the city where projects are, or whatever it is the applications come from. Anything else? Matters from staff?
I don't have much. As far as the growth policy goes, you guys, obviously we didn't have anything to talk about tonight. We're putting together a public participation plan, so we're going into great detail on how we decided to step back and put together a specific plan of how we're going to engage the public, what the meetings are going to be like, what meetings we're going to have. So we're currently, Alan and I are putting that together, and then we'll be bringing that to you, I think, in April for you guys just to review, and if you have any comments on that. So we get a better grasp on how we're going to approach our public outreach, because I think that, I mean, there's a lot of people that are interested in how we're going to do that. And rather than just charge ahead, we wanted to get that done first, as well as sort of wait to see what the legislature is going to do, because there's still some language out there that may significantly change how we approach the growth policy update and especially the public participation portion of it. And so if you're wondering why we're not talking about the growth policy tonight, that's one of the reasons, is we're just stepping back a little and get that right. We put a growth policy website up on the city website with updates and information, with the background, with the stuff the presentation that you guys saw with some of the existing zoning and that kind of stuff. You can check that, and then when we do send our agendas out for the meeting, we will have on the agenda, if we're going to meet at 5 o'clock to start the growth policy discussion when we do that.
Thanks, Dave.
Based on your guys' direction at the last meeting, if you weren't here, the planning board decided they wanted to talk about that at 5, not just do it at 6. So.
Yeah. So the first hour will be, and then we'll do our regular meeting. Looks like our next meeting is on April 20th. Anybody not going to be here? 1, 2. Okay. Okay. Well, we'll have to keep in touch about that then, because we will have this postponement that's going to be important that we act on, or maybe it'll just go to council without a recommendation if we can't have a meeting because of a quorum issue. So, okay. Motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Okay. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.